medicalising young people, chemically castrating young people, harming them. Imagine if you're an adolescent trans feminine person going through a male puberty and not just getting the odd hair, you're growing a moustache and then a beard, and it's growing and it's not stopping. Women are saying we need those private spaces because we don't want to share them with men. But the question is, does that mean that other types of women are not included? Sports is another big one. A mum once told me that the most heartbreaking thing for her was... So I've been thinking quite a lot about the trans debate. Now, actually I don't like that word. And all that I've ever said is the only debate we should be having is how to help trans people live their lives more easily. But I've been thinking that maybe I should go a little bit deeper. We hear the very far extreme views, but actually there will be people in the middle who are thinking, what is this debate all about? So I asked my friend ChatGPT, I said, what exactly is the trans debate and who's going to win? The trans debate refers to a highly polarised global cultural, legal and political conflict about how society should define and accommodate sex and gender identity. And I think when I think back sometimes to when I was learning about all of this, and I think back to the Equality Act, I think they made a mistake. The fact that they allowed for two protected characteristics, sex and also gender reassignment. So people were protected on the basis of their birth sex, the sex that they were assigned at birth. And then they're also separately protected if they have undergone gender reassignment or are undergoing gender reassignment. And so there's a confusion there, there's a conflict. And that's the conflict that we've seen appearing. That's why we've had that big push for Women's Scotland case. And why they were pushing so hard. What do you actually mean by sex? Who is actually protected under the category of sex? And are all women protected under that category or just cisgender women? And it is confusing. Did we need both? Did we need to have sex and gender reassignment? And what exactly is the difference between sex and gender reassignment in the Equality Act? And I think that's where we've allowed confusion to come in. The conflict primarily centres around two opposing viewpoints, often referred to as the trans-inclusive or gender-affirming, that's mine, perspective, and the gender-critical or sex-based rights perspective. So let's have a look what those two actually mean. And I'm trying to be impartial about this, as impartial as I can be. So the trans-inclusive perspective, the core belief, gender identity is an innate core aspect of a person's selfhood. So that means that your gender identity isn't something that you can tell by looking at your biology or looking at your chromosomes, looking at your body parts. It's not something that you can do a test for. It's not something you can do a brain scan for. It's the only way that you can actually know what your gender identity is to ask yourself. It's an innate sense of self. It's deep within you. And then people say, well, what about the social construct? And yes, it could be a social construct. It could be that your gender identity, why do we have a gender identity at all? Who made these classifications of male and female? And really what we saw is that some people group together and live as what we call male, and some people group together and live as what we call female, and some people sit right in the middle, and some people don't fit in with either of those two binary gender roles. And that's equally important for those people. But what we have to understand is that gender identity is completely and utterly different from the sex you're assigned at birth, which is the best guess that was made. It was the reproductive system that your body gave you because your chromosomes were what they are. And of course, we have to understand that there aren't just two types of sex chromosome pattern. There are intersex patterns as well. So there is the traditionally male pattern of XY chromosomes. There's the traditionally female pattern of XX chromosomes. And then there's other patterns. There are XO and XXY and XXYY, the intersex patterns. Sorry to interrupt. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching this video. I notice that some of you don't actually subscribe, and it would really help me if you did subscribe, and it will also make sure that you can get my next video if you want to. So just click the button. So what's the gender critical perspective? The core belief is that biological sex is binary, immutable, that means unchangeable, and distinct from gender identity. and biological sex is the most relevant factor for organising certain aspects of society. Is biological sex binary? Well, most people fit into a category of XX or XY. That's your biological sex. There are people who don't fit into that category. So biological sex isn't binary, because there are people who are intersex as well, with different chromosome patterns that I explained. And then the gender critical view is that society's spaces and society's allocations should be granted based on that biological binary rather than an innate gender identity binary. And that is one view. So what about access to spaces? Transgender people who were assigned male at birth, but now who have transitioned to living as female and asking the world to see them as female, they wish to be treated as female. They wish to have access to female spaces. And there are many, many people who are saying, well, of course they should. They are female because that's their gender identity deep within inside them. And they should have totally free access to female spaces. The gender critical view is that separate spaces for women exist primarily for privacy, safety, and dignity away from biological males. So women are saying we need those private spaces because we don't want to share them with men, because we want our dignity and our privacy. We want our space that doesn't include men, and that's why you have sex-based spaces. Putting aside the view that should we consider all men to be a danger, and I don't think we should people be allowed to have separate spaces that affords them the dignity and privacy that they desire? And of course they should. But the question is, really, does that mean that other types of women are not included? And that's where I find difficulty with it, because there are other women who are also asking just for that same privacy, that same dignity. And yes, maybe underneath their trousers, underneath their skirt, they have a different set of genitals. But what is it that we are asking for privacy and dignity from? Is it a set of genitals? Is it a set of chromosomes? Or is it a set of thought patterns and the way that we live our lives? And actually, if you put everybody fully clothed and just allocate people male and female, people will gravitate that way and that way. And of course, not everybody looks typically female and not everybody looks typically male. There's a big spectrum in the middle and at either end where people don't fit into that category completely. So what about those people? Should we be allocating spaces on genitals? Should we be allocating spaces on chromosomes? Should we be allocating spaces on choice and where someone feels most comfortable? Should we be allocating spaces on where someone can be safe and feel dignified? And actually, of course, you can't allocate on genitals, you can't allocate on chromosomes because there's such a wide variation. And the other thing about the single-sex spaces is if you're trying to exclude anybody that is biologically male, then you only have to look at 100 transgender women and look at them and think, but they're just living as their lives as women. They're not a threat to the dignity or safety or privacy of any other woman. And they would themselves feel very, very uncomfortable if they were forced to use a man's space simply because of the genetics that they were given at birth. So very, very difficult to put that right. And instead, what people like me feel is actually, shouldn't we just, if we're going to have separate spaces, shouldn't we just allow basic human dignity to say, please choose the space that you feel most comfortable in and that you won't cause discomfort to anybody else. But you have to balance both your own comfort and the comfort and safety of others. And this idea that trans females are automatically dangerous simply because they may have what we see as male genitals, it's a dangerous concept, I feel. Healthcare is another point. So gender-affirming healthcare. Some people say, well, if it's so natural, if it's just gender identity and it's so natural, why do you need healthcare? In medicine, sometimes bodies aren't born functioning in the way that you would expect them to. So, for example, some people who have XY chromosomes and testicles, even though they have testicles, their testicles don't produce testosterone. Or they do produce testosterone, but the testosterone doesn't work on the body. And so there are differences. There are different ways that our bodies work. They don't always work as expected. And for transgender people who identify as female, what their body was really expecting was ovaries and an estrogen hormone profile. But instead, their chromosomes, XY, gave them testicles and a testosterone profile. And so sometimes in medicine, when things aren't quite right or aren't as expected or aren't as somebody wishes they were, we can influence that. And so gender-affirming healthcare is all about switching off the natural hormone production and instead replacing it with the hormone that matches their gender identity. And then obviously there is surgery as well. Some people who were assigned female at birth and have grown breasts, for example, find those breasts incredibly dysphoric. Their feeling is that they are a man and they identify as a man and they don't expect themselves to have breasts, and so they want those removed and to make a more chest that matches what we know as a masculine style chest. So that's gender-affirming healthcare. It's really just going with that person's wishes, aligning their body with the gender identity that they experience rather than the chromosomal pattern that they were assigned at birth. The gender-critical perspective on healthcare is that caution should be exercised regarding medical interventions for young people. So this is something that we see ever such a lot, isn't it? Medicalising young people, chemically castrating young people, harming them. But actually, you just have to listen and talk to as many trans young people as I have listened and talked to, and you will see and hear the extreme discomfort that going through a puberty that doesn't match your gender identity causes. And, the way that I've equated it in the past is, a cisgender adolescent male who is growing puffy breast tissues going through puberty. They hate it. You can see them bunching forward with their t-shirt. They don't want that protrusion. They don't want those things growing underneath their t-shirt. Imagine if you're a trans boy and actually they're going to keep growing and growing and growing. Or imagine, ladies don't like having hairs on their chin. Imagine if you're an adolescent trans feminine person going through a male puberty and not just getting the odd hair, you're growing a moustache and then a beard, and it's growing and it's not stopping and your voice is breaking. A mum once told me that the most heartbreaking thing for her was watching her daughter's voice properly break. And so, yes, it can feel from the outside looking in that you shouldn't intervene with young people. But actually, when you listen to families and listen to transgender young people, that wrong puberty is so incredibly painful. And actually, whatever the talk about, whatever the discussion has been politically and societally recently, the medical evidence is very much in favour of gender-affirming healthcare for trans young people when they're ready for it. Sports is another big one. So obviously bodies are different, and if you've undergone gender reassignment, having gone through, for example, a testosterone puberty, will your body be stronger? Will that give you an unfair advantage in sports? It's a conversation for a different day, but in my view, there's always variations in bodies, and there are always people who will have advantages in sports. And is it fair to exclude trans people simply because they have a different type of advantage? Not forgetting, actually, that studies show that there is no advantage, but that's another discussion for another day. So that's the trans debate unpicked from my trying to be impartial point of view. I stand very firmly on the side of accepting gender diversity. The stance is that some people were assigned a gender at birth that was written on their birth certificate by simply looking at their body, looking at that baby's genitals and saying, okay, this person is going to be a boy. But then actually when that person grows up, you realise that that was a mistake, and actually that innate gender identity is not male, it's female. So yes, maybe they have chromosomes that we associate with males, maybe they have the genitals that we associate with males, but their whole being, their whole gender identity is female, or non-binary, or neither. And those people are transgender. They exist, they always have done. And the debate for me really is, how do we integrate society to allow those people to live their best lives? I don't want to hurt any woman's feelings. I don't want to hurt any man's feelings. I don't want to hurt any non-binary person's feelings. I simply want everybody to live in peace and harmony. And I firmly believe that if we put a sign on the door that says a particular type of person is allowed in here, then all people who fit that category are allowed in here. So if we want to segregate toilets on the basis of genitals, then we should put genitals on the door. If we want to segregate in terms of chromosomes, then we put chromosomes on the door. But if you put man or woman on the door, then everybody who identifies as a woman or a man should have access to that space. And the same with sports. Yes, by all means, make categories for big people or tall people or short people or heavy people or light people. Make those categories. But if you make a category for women, then all women should be allowed in that space. Let's all just strive for equality, whether that's on a sex basis or on a gender reassignment basis. Let's remember, these are just human beings, all wishing to live together peacefully. And I don't think any of us wouldn't want that. Thanks for watching, thanks for listening. And don't forget that I write about this all day, every day on my website. Come and have a visit. I'll see you there. Link is below.